My name is Corey. Not Corey with a Y or Corey with an EY. Corey with just an I. A usually feminine spelling of a name for a guy. Not that I mind much of what spelling or so on of what my parents actually gave me. A few years ago I'd just been let go from my first job out of college. It'd been pretty good money, but the company went under, so I started applying to every job I could find. Indeed, Monster, even Craigslist. One Craigslist job in particular was based on the outskirts of the city I lived, but I was ready to take anything. The job in question was some basic data entry and assistant work. At least that's what the job listing said. It was a pretty basic website in retrospect, but the company message seemed to make it sound like they were heavily about serving the city and facilitating volunteer work. Within minutes of applying, I got a response inviting me for an interview that same day, though it titled me as a Miss Corey. I was going to respond to correct them, but it read like it was an automated response, so there'd be no one to read it or reply to me. I figured I'd just have to correct them once I got there, and again, it didn't really seem like a big deal. I'd gotten this once or twice before in the past. I drove to the location the website had listed, and it didn't seem too out of the ordinary. It was on the second floor of a small building that was sandwiched in between a pawn shop and a phone store. I didn't think too much of it because this was a big city, and even if this was on the outskirts, a job was a job. I looked up to the second floor on the outside and saw someone looking down at me. I couldn't make out the face, but it was a person. That much I'm sure of. I went inside of the building and took the elevator up to the second floor and didn't find a single soul. It looked like a half-finished office floor from what I remember, with some doors opened and some locks shut, but there was just simply no one to speak to, no one to inform that I'd arrived. There was one cubicle, but one of the detachable walls had been left in another office room. There was a computer monitor in one room, but no desktop attached to it. A half-finished company banner and a bookcase. On closer inspection of the bookcase, all the books weren't books at all, but a cardboard printing of a bunch of books stacked together. I finally had too much and called the phone number that had been on the website, but I heard no phone ringing from where I stood. More so, the phone I called seemed to cut off after a ring and a half, sending me straight to voicemail. Sufficiently creeped out by now, or wondering if I had stumbled on something I shouldn't have, I took the elevator down. As the elevator doors closed, I heard someone muttering angrily. I thought that was a girl's name. I didn't want to stay and find out who it was. Instead, I walked right back to my car and drove back home, not even daring to look back at the window of the floor I was sure I'd been scheduled for. That very evening, out of morbid curiosity, I checked Craigslist. The posting was gone. I looked for the website. It had been disabled. To this day, I still wonder what or who did I stumble upon. My greatest regret is not calling the police about this. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out from her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move in together since they'd only been dating for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like "Roommate Wanted, Female Only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable with living with any men. The other roommates would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from the outside of the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she received an email back with all the details and a time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and Amanda wanted to stop by at 8 PM. When she arrived, there's a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice, but slightly unkempt. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows. Still, no alarms for Amanda though. When she knocks on the back door, an older man opens it. At first Amanda thinks she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant was out and he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms start going off, but aren't at red alert yet. First, the guy clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looked like he lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda noticed one huge red flag. No furniture. Nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed irritable to keep the lights on for too long, rushing her around, only letting her look at the rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walked down the hallway into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap it up and leave, but trying to be polite. As she's giving the guy her "thanks for showing me" bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. It's been recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in a small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens it, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement's pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs, and says,
"Ladies first."
What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers it. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from round back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." With a motion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out the back door. She says the guy just looked at her like he was confused. Once outside, she sprinted to the car and sped the hell out of there. When Amanda got home, she told her mother and my brother everything. Cops were called, they took her statement and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been deleted as soon as she left. The house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found the closed room the landlord didn't want her to look in is where the man had been staying. There was a pile of old dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. The creepiest bit is he had plastered up ripped pages from porno mags all over the walls. The really scary part was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine about shin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was empty, except another old pile of blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with a few rolls of assorted tape. You'll be surprised to know, Amanda ended up not moving in. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide. She had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little bit quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a "thanks." I mean, I looked nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it didn't really make any sense to me. When I got back home, she'd asked me if I'd seen her room yet. I said no, and she took me up to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she'd been saying I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend much time together really. She'd come home from work and practically run to her room. She'd spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I'd hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the fuck she could possibly be doing. Occasionally she'd come out to talk for like 2 minutes, and she'd be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth," and then there'd be this long, awkward pause, and she'd give out a creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 AM because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. Every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name obviously freaked me out, and it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to get some sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back and listened to her. 10 minutes into the story and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried the neighbours were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I asked her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettling feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is there's no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on the light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was drunk, so drunk, and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled to her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out to the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying that she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember anything. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned it on, and to my shock, I'd received about 40 text messages, all over the course of 2 fucking hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't even respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder, if I hadn't sat my dresser in front of that door, would she have come in quietly and slit my throat? Who knows, but it still freaks me out. My name's Tom, and I live in the St. Louis area, and this is a horror story about something that happened to me that almost fucked up my life forever. When I was 21 years old, I broke up with my first ever serious girlfriend, who I'd been together with for almost 8 months. Needless to say, I was devastated. I fell into a deep depression, and I began abusing painkillers and Xanax really heavily. I began looking for any chick I could find to rebound with. I ended up looking on the personal section on Craigslist, and I found an ad for a girl named Stephanie. I started talking to her, and I arranged for her to come pick me up. On that night we had intercourse, and decided to make it a regular thing. She was an older lady, about 35, and a bigger girl, but she had her own apartment, and enough money to keep me loaded on as much drugs and alcohol as I could stand. To be honest, I kinda used this lady. After a while she grew really attached to me, and started to want a more serious relationship. Eventually, she started dropping hints about wanting to get married. She said she wanted to do this to help me out, so she could get me on her insurance, so I could get help for my drug and alcohol problem, which obviously I refused to consider. One day we got in a big argument, and she told the police that I'd been abusing her, and got a temporary restraining order on me. A week after she did this, she called me crying her eyes out, saying please forgive me, I love you, and all this other bollocks. She said she wanted me to come pick her up, get some dope, some alcohol, get something to eat, and being the addict I am, of course I accepted. From the moment she picked me up, I noticed that she was acting kind of odd. She was usually really talkative, and was always on my arse wanting to talk to me about this and that, but on this day, she was oddly quiet. When we got back to her apartment, after I walked in, she immediately pushed me on the couch and pulled my pants down and began giving me head, and she climbed on top of me and began riding me, and she seemed angry when I didn't come inside her. I'd been getting bad vibes off her the whole night, so after this happened, I immediately asked her for a ride back home, which she quickly agreed to. After I got dropped off at the house, I went inside and sat down with my sister and watched some SpongeBob. A strange turn of events, I'm aware. About 10 minutes later, I was home and got a call on the phone. I picked it up, and to my surprise, the lady on the other end said that this is the St. Louis County Police Department and we're going to need you to come outside to talk to you. I ran downstairs and hid my weed and my pills, then walked outside to figure out what the hell was going on. There were about 7 different cops on my porch, and they were all pointing tasers and guns at me. One of them hit me in the back of my legs with a nightstick and put me on the ground. I was handcuffed. The cops then talked to my mum and got permission to go inside of the house. They took a drug dog and began doing a thorough search of my room and the basement area. None of the cops on the scene would tell me what the fuck was going on. Whenever I'd ask a question, they'd just ignore me. The only response they gave me is that I'd have a chance to tell my story to the detective at the station. When I got to the police station, I had a bombshell dropped on me. Apparently this lady had accused me of kidnapping her and abusing her. She told the police that she'd come by my house to return some of my stuff because we'd just broken up, and that I had come out with a knife and held it to her throat and forced my way into her vehicle, took her back to her apartment and done awful things. Thankfully, I'd remembered that we'd made a couple of stops on the way to her apartment. She had gone inside of a gas station to get a couple of packs of cigarettes with me, so there was no way I could have kidnapped her. The police still swabbed my dick for DNA and also took my clothes for evidence, and I was forced to spend the night in the St. Louis County Jail wearing nothing but hospital scrubs. I was released the next morning, but my ordeal was far from over. The lady began constantly stalking me. She'd call me every night at odd times from blocked numbers, and either crying into the phone or just begging to talk to me. I also began seeing her vehicle quite a lot in the neighbourhood, even though she lives nowhere close to me. I called the police about this a couple of times, but they didn't really seem to give a shit. I wanted nothing to do with the court system though, because I had a criminal record, and I just wanted to ignore her and hope the problem would go away. After a couple of months, she finally did stop bothering me. However, still to this day, sometimes I get a call at 2 or 3 in the morning from a blocked number, and every new girlfriend I get, she messages them on Facebook and tells them what I apparently done to her. Moral of the story is, be careful who you meet online. Whether you're a guy or a girl, all it takes is one crazy person to completely ruin your life. I'd gotten used to checking Craigslist before buying anything new, so when my ice cream maker died, I headed right there. I found the one I wanted. It was new in the box, and emailed to see if it was still available. For some reason, I assumed I was talking to a woman, and we made plans to meet up. I'd gotten sort of used to the carelessness about always meeting in public, and agreed to come to her house, believing that she had several small children, which made it difficult to leave home. I was supposed to go after work, and we switched to text messages so they could text the address, and so I could let them know when I was on my way. I got home, and they texted me the address. My normal routine at this point would be to hop in the car and use the GPS to find it, but since I had booted up my PC while waiting, I just decided to use Google Maps. I typed in the address and it showed a registered sex offender. Violent sex offender. I googled the phone number and the same person came up. I let them know I was not coming, went to Walmart and spent $5 more to buy it there. So, Mr. Sex Offender, who tried to lure me with ice cream, let's not meet.